Hello, my target is to increase my speaking skills along with the reasoning comprehension understanding that I can understand the paragraph or not. So, what my idea is very simple to read out one of the own essay and put it the same essay on the notebook LLM. So, notebook LLM will create a quiz. So, after the reading the essay we will attempt to quiz and then we will figure out that how much we have achieved from it or not. So this is the essay therapy for billionaire. As my grandfather's money thought, wealth can be a poison. The rich must reckon with its cost to recover their humanity. I cannot remember a time when I was not conscious of wealth. At the age of 7, attending a private school in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I was embarrassed when wealthier friends from the western suburb come over to my house, which was small compared with theirs. Later, living in Arlington, Virginia, and at a public school, I felt the opposite. Sheepish about a house that was grander than some of my friends' home. House size was one of the earliest metrics by which I clocked wealth. Wealth was always something I quietly bristled with. My father grew up in a poor farming family, but my mother come from money. Her father was an early billionaire, though I was raised maternally as middle class. My own identity has had inflected from both extremes of the classes circumstances into which my parents were born, inheriting a confidence and adventurousness, even feeling of invincibility that come with privilege, while also tapping into the thriftiness, stoic resilience, and determination that come from bootstrapping. My grandfather, who never questioned his standing, pursued wealth with singular dedication. My early memories of him are anchored in his country estate in Millbrook, New York. Uh, I caught salamanders by the pool, visiting the canals where he kept hunting dog. Caviar, caviar were regularly served with dinner. Though he is now in his 90s, his shadow looms large. As a patriarch who scandalized his wife's BASPS beach club in Southampton with his European speedos was compacted in every endeavor, e- even beating my brother and me at backgammon as children, and whom others credited to impress, craned to impress, though he lived very privately. A post-war Greek immigrant from the prominent shipping family in Athens, my grandfathers arrived in the US at aged 6 and come of age during the Greek shipping boom fueled by the maritime handover of the naval ship. Decommunized, decommunized ship purchased cheaply and repurposed to service newly expanded trade routes meant that Greeks dominated post-war shipping on the back of cheap bank loans guaranteed by the Greek government. As the only son in a family of daughters, my Papoyu was the chosen one to carry of his father's industrial legacy. In his early 20s, he experienced the birthright as a heavyweight and rebelled. He dropped out of Princeton, wanting to pursue the Bohemian dream and write novel until my grandmother became pregnant with my mother and put an end to his literary aspiration. Dutifully, he stepped in the role of provider and shipping tycoon. Upon his father's death, my grandfather inherited a majority share of his father's wealth and company. His sister, veteran now of many legal appeals, maintained that rather than provide for his mother, who was still living, and for them as detailed by his father's will, he sidelined the women of the family, investing in his own business and art collection. His own daughters once grew like wise received scant support compared with what they believed they were due. Though he did provide them each with a down payment for a house and a buffer for retirement, my mother and her sister skated through life with a Park Avenue mentality that was at odds with their more financially improvised circumstances. They favored part-time work that afforded them time and flexibility, throwing themselves in the juicier aspect of living, travel, romance, motherhood, intellectuals, and methodical pursuit, my, mystical pursuits. They approached with with zest and dynamism, with Meraki, as we say in Greek, to do something with love and soul, comp- compensating for the world in which the luxuries that they had grew up with were removed. Given my own peephole onto the higher echelons of society, I become an observer of its eccentricities and many of its unevenable characteristics. That the word of wealth was the ultimate insider subculture. I associate it with a frigid, soulless quality that felt culturally void. As I have learned, it is not uncommon for the children and grandchildren of the super rich to abandon their feathered nets and turn away from money and power. My ease with disowning class privilege largely come from my father. He grew up on the less than $1 a day in a poor farming community in King City, Missouri. His uh, county was one of the least to get electricity in the whole country. My dad was working Horatio Alger story, getting a scholarship to Harvard and charting his own course. My parents' radically different class perspective informed their approach to just about everything. My mom relying on an attitude of abundance, exceptionalism, and at time entitlement. My father more cautious, frugal, and risk-averse, hardworking but given to boats of shame in the space not meant for him. A family friend once described it, the difference between my mother and the father in watching them peel a pear. My father meticulously ensured no fruit was left on peel. My mother was more slapdash. The observation stuck with me. I was constantly working on, to navigate between their words. Beyond my mother's being a first generation American and Park Avenue exile, my father's uh, ascension, accession to the middle class likewise saw him enter a world far flung from the one he had grown up in. In the region of Europe, Empire Prairie, Missouri, Empire Prairie, Missouri, child labor and course were part of survival. He slept with a hot iron in the dead of winter because, as the fifth child of seven, he did not have a room but slept on the porch exposed to the element. His identity could not have diverged more from that of my grandfather, who resided resided in the glamorous Carlyle Hotel in New York for much of his later life, with a concierge, a cook, a staff, a cook and staff. Yet both men were anchored in the idea of being self-made, a shared values that generated a degree of mutual respect between them. My father was welcomed into my mother's family. In fact, cross-class marriages were quite common in Greek society, especially when aristocratic daughters were paired with aspiring entrepreneurial merchants, since there was a certain distrust of Aristotle's sons, spoiled by luxuries of their upbringing. Would they have the drive to achieve and provide? Both my parents were terrible with money. Neither had learned about saving for retirement from their families. My father's dad, a small farmer, was killed in a tractor accident when my father was 14, leaving no pension or saving. After it emerged that he had never paid taxes, his family faced crippling debt. My mother's loves and loaves, sorry, my mother's loaves and fishes approach to her finance manual left everything to chance inheritance. Both were outsider in their own way. The outsider identity was romantic to me. The extremes of lovers, lower or upper class psychology resonate with greater pulses of vitality, vitality and authenticity. When I was in my 20s, I swing between extreme fragility and lavish reward. In college, I hardly ever went out to eat. I slept in a tiny bedroom without a proper door for 320 a month, but then I had just off a Rio de Janeiro for Carnival. I incarnated a protested work ethic by day, privileged hedonist by night. Older and more tempered now, I have converted to the virtue of the middle class in a way that would horrify my younger self. I discovered a gift for navigating mainstream American culture like neither of my parents could. Embracing a middle class identity has given me a sense of belonging, economic security, and psychological safety. With time, I have come to the appreciative the psychological self regulation inherited in a middling identity To paraphrase the early English philosophers, David Hume's idea of the middle station of life, I offer an early endorsement of the superiority of middle class life. He argues that the middle station offer the fullest security of virtue, setting the challenge of being lower class as life of patience and resignation. He believed the middle class have the greatest opportunity for the friendship, wisdom, and ability. I have come to agree with him. The notable surge in the billionaire wealth, power, and influence infrequently in today's news. A news billionaire is created roughly every day. Within the next decade, we are on the track to seeding at least 5 trillionaire. A recent Pew survey on the immorality found that only 18% of Americans believed that being extremely rich was immoral. Gambling, getting a divorce, having an affair, speaking children, and using marijuana were considered far more reprehensible. What enables this permissiveness toward runaway wealth accumulation? In part, the eruption of billionaires class kept alive our own unclaimed and unfettered dream of success and epoxies our own shadow craving for the spoils of their wealth. In other mood, however we denounces them, don't billionaires threaten the social contract to support the economy that work for all. Surely we should make the billionaires an endangered species and tax them out of existence. Billionaire behaving badly after all has become quite a theme. We have all read about teach its titan macro-dosing ketamine, influencing political election and policy, holding lavish weddings, feathering children out of a misguided ethical concern about population growth, and acting out a toxic masculine script equipped with prepare, compounded, and ayahuasca traits. Some psychologists have gone so far as to diagnose in the super rich a conce- constellation of interlinked personality traits, Machiavellism, psychology, and narcissism. They call this cluster the dark trait, as seen it as endemic to the billionaires class. The sociopathic and luxury-seeking qualities of the billionaire would have troubled moral philosophy of old. Many early modern thinkers were wrestled with the consequences of newfound consumerism and were deeply skeptical of the luxury, believing it led to individual and social dysregulation. As the 18th century French poet and philosopher Jean-Francois de Saint-Lambert brought the primary cause of luxury is our lack of satisfaction with the situation, our yearning to be better off. This desire is the cause of men's passion of their virtue and their wishes. In the word of 18th century writer Francisco Fellon, luxury poisoned the whole nation. There was a sentiment among moral philosophers that was lost our inner lens. The striving self sorry, committed to fascinating a middle class identity made possibly by the newly industrialized era. These philosophers would have seen the runaway entrepreneur we see in a Venzo or a Musk as a morally bankrupt, a social threat, and perish, causing injury to society and themselves. In the word of 18th century philosopher Anthony Ashley Cooper, third Earl of Shaft Hurley, the same irregularities of the appetite which make him ill to others make him ill also to himself. In some ways, these thinkers anticipated the mental distress that we so often see with hyper-affluence, the excessive individuality and inability to control their applause, which were then seen as a challenge to early modern social order. But you don't need to be billionaire to experience the way wealth poisons the paralyzed people must, especially perhaps when it is inherited. Studies how so that the anxiety in the wealthy teens is 25 to 30% higher than the less affluent peers. There are higher pressure of attention, more isolation, disconnection, and peer pressure, and the value attached to not displaying vulnerability. One multi-generational wealth holder, a close friend of mine, whose fortunes track back to the settlement of Manhattan and were then export, expon, ex, exponentially enlarged by the great grandfather who was tailored tycoon, observed that wealthy families are wrought with dysfunction. He talked me through a litany of family stories that included substance abuse, a personality disorder, inner family theft, the trauma of losing money, sex tourism, and emotional abuse. As a child, he had seven nannies in a 11-year and found his mother distant and emotionally cold. When he was 7, he had threatened to jump out of his apartment window. Family lore proudly citing William the Conqueror as a direct ancestor, but at the same time, uh, given the family resources, there was very little pressure on him to make something of his life. His own agency felt curtailed. He struggled to feel seen. So often people connect to my family story rather than to me, he said. Several young people with inherited money have told me that they had imbibed deep lesson from their parents about not talking about their wealth so as not to be taken advantage of. They kept their wealth secret from boyfriends and girlfriends, classmates and colleagues. For many talking about their privilege was a coming out moment. A lot of them felt shame or embarrassment around their wealth. One young inheritor, Remy, not her real name, who was happened to adopted by the wealthy business owner in a Midwest, told me occupying Wall Street happened when I was in a middle school, and a lot of news I was receiving was that rich people were evil and should be punished. She felt strange about her wealth alone and wrestling with it on his tiny island. She avoided any discussion around class makers that would out her as being rich. Silence or not talking about money is one of the several social cues the wealthy receive. Marian Moore, or an activist who works with wealthy peoples to help them redistribute or liberate their money, refers to these cues as money manners. There is so much unspoken etiquette around money, unconscious belief that go unchecked, and heirs and members of the owning class herself. Moore's work largely concerned changing people's consciousness around money, though she credited a lot of her social justice work to her family. She was that She says that they never talk about money either. She felt this strong division between her family's social justice work and her financial education, which largely come from wealth professional. I knew I was going to inherit because a lot of my older brothers and sisters had. Was sent to a bank to claim my inheritance at 18. She believed a lot of wealth professional teach you things that are not true, that you can give away only a certain amount, that you cannot touch the principle, that you have responsibility to future generation in your lineage above others. She lament that the whole industry and livelihood of financial managers is wrapped up in getting you not to redistribute your wealth. The German heirs Paula Schweitzer shared a similar sentiment about how systems of wealth management are intended to keep people wealthy and conventional. She first inherited money when her grand-aunt died by suicide. This aunt has endorsed long-standing power skirmishes with her family, a family that had become billionaire through the successful sale of their family-run pharmaceutical company in 2016 for the 4.4 billion US dollars. For the Swiss wealth and patriarchal control went side by side. Her aunt had wanted a role in running the company, but she pushed out by her brother. Soldiers described even the act of her working as a transgressive. Her parents think working is for peasant. She tell me, in the world in which capital belongs, capital cap, work for the wealthy and sometimes feel performative and act of blending in. Swizers was hell-bent on breaking the cycle of elitism. I first heard about her through our mutual friend in Berlin. Swizers was a part of an emerging scene of impact entrepreneurial working to address refugee issue, and she founded start startup vote in 2015 as an entrepreneurial incubator to support refugees and provide innovation and intervention that address the challenge faced by migrants. Years later, I reconnect with Swagers, who was since moved to the remote Greek island at the center of the migration crisis to continue her work with refugees. For her life today is a far cry from her upbringing, where she lived under strict social control. At 18, she had to sign a power of attorney giving her father control over her money. She could not even get a cell phone contract or open a bank account in Germany without his permission. She described the plight of her mother's during that time as even worse, having money but no rights, and being treated like a social dog. Society dog. Susan had liberated herself from her father's stranglehold and now speak openly about how money was used as a system of control in her family. Patriarchy come up repeatedly in these conversations around wealth. Women who had their spending policy policed by their husband. My own great grandmother had to beg her wealthy husband for her weekly allowance. Women who found themselves squeezed out of fortune, women who traded in their identity for social role and to meet expectation of a certain class identity. Great wealth seemed to be to heighten the patriarchal imperative. In contrast to the portrait of the silence of ornamental women My mother and her sisters were brave, perhaps because of their father's relatives in different or their maternal disinherent, disinheritance. They lived on their own terms, l- lovely and forceful, and at a time overly expressive to the point to treading on others people's feeling. Well rich in vitality, they were maternally broke for huge swathes of time. They moved through his life as if they had never been taught the rules of the game, which of course they didn't. They had not. They certainly had not been entitled into the rights of middle class existence, financial planning, budgeting, juggling, child rearing without nannies and cooks, even paying parking tickets, all these were aligned to them. Later, I come to see my mother and her sister as as you might regard exile, living with a profound sense of dislocation from their class identity. But as a child, I perceived them to be a free as Wetton godnesses without a uh, domination. The younger generation of male in our family describe growing up with their mothers as living under a matriarchy. These women's rejection from their billionaire father are paradoxically enabled an interesting empowered female microculture, making it difficult for any man, child, or partner to have standing. Since my mother relatives disinheritance in many ways forget her emancipation, my grandfather might have done her a service in forcing her hand at independence. She was able to make a life of her own, still not inheriting the family's wealth left a vow. At some level, it means not being loved for others, but the redistribution wealth of reckoning with the karmic depth of wealthy forebears, bringing a reward, sense of purpose, belonging, and social responsibility. In a YouTube interview with Raj Samani in 2015, Bill Gates said that leaving children massive wealth would not be a favor to them. I want to give them a chance to have their own earning and success. In quilting his children less than 1% in his approximate 103 billion fortune, he is allowing them to carve out their own identity. Brian knows his own real name, a young person with wealth and privilege from Portland, Oregon, whose family initially inherited 15 to 16 million, describes his journey as a focus on freeing myself, pursuing liberation from the karmic debt of his ancestor. The Brian wealth redistribution is a key owing his seat and his family historical legacy. His father made most of their money in the mid 90s from selling pipe and hardware supplies to developers in the Portland area. Today, Brian is redistributing money to indigenous sovereignty, housing, and racial justice and other causes in line with his annual redistribution plan. He distribute in areas where his family's wealth was exaggerated, perpetuating and benefiting from structural harm. Brian says it has taken him a long time to come out of his shell and that his wealth confined him in a small range of allowing relationship and reflection. He called out the habit of being agreeable as a part of wealth culture. Brian is also a member of an organization called Resource Generalization that actively organize people aged 18 to 25 with access to wealth and class privilege to engage in a wealth redistribution. I first learned about resource generation from my college friend Adam, who had morally vested with a 1 billion inheritance in the 20s. At the time, I thought his self-consciousness and fragility felt off-putting. In this scheme of things, his inheritance was tiny and could easily secure him a house or a education for his children. I found myself challenging and judgment and pragmatic auntie. Why dismantle your privilege? Even Adam would admit that his anguish around wealth and that of money, his fears from resource generation was inconsequential. Thinking ethically about how to spend 1 million or 5 billion or 10 or even 10 million were not course correct the deep structural inequalities of the world. I would take a restructuring of capital at a different scale. Billionaire in lockstep to truly serve course, reserve course. What I found in a resource generation was an awareness incubator, and certain are the therapeutic journey that wealthy members had undertaken to security scrutinize themselves and restructure conditions that had led to their fortunes. The journey they had gone on was profound. They could talk about their money with ease. They seemed held it from the paralysis that can come from wealth. Another member, Erin Not Here Realm, originally from Tokyo, inherited wealth from her father and grandfather who worked in investment bank and finance. She shared how her parents, Reagan conservative types, would be against her engaging in a wealth redistribution. They would see it as a rejection of their work and a sacrifice. Nevertheless, her trust gave her freedom to spend money in a way and on causes they don't approve. She able to give away more money than she makes without it having any substantial impact on her life. After for her coming to this conclusion was profound. It means letting go of an artificial security mindset. We would not think of wealthy people as poisoning a security mindset, but the many intergeneralization wealth holders in it are deeply ingrained mentality posed on why frugal forebears. A wealthy friend explained his psychology to me. When the words feel unsafe or when people feel insecure, that security mindset can become contagious. I come with this flux feeling of not having enough. Even the wealthiest in the mindset, any from the substantial philanthropy can be doubted. Doubled financial irresponsible, the scarcity mindset create a justification for hoarding wealth. Many families have lived through boom and bust economics. The now all too well how wealth and can fluctuate. As a why my grandfather witnessed people starving during the Great Famine in Greece in 1914, begging for food at the gate of his house. Wealth affordable him protected, but taught him that if he didn't work hard too, he too could be a step away from hunger. For many ultra wealthy people, hoarding is essential to their economic security and the security of their lineage. Irene said that one impetus for her joining resource generation was that she felt like her wealth was the product of deep inequality, but she also felt psychologically crippling by her parents' fear and programming around money. Resource generations helped me face up to that and start distribution my money more significantly in her graduate research and provision previous international development work. Erin has been working to understand how to make change to the international financial system that would make it less extractive. In many ways, it feels like she is working against the legacy of the financier who created the condition for her privilege. At the same time, Arlene says she does not have any friends who were working class. She believes part of psychology she had to wrestle with is the unspoken wealth ideology that the rest of the world exists to serve me. She does not connect easily with working class people and people outside her class background. Another thing she wants her to remedy. No young, one young heritage that Marian Morris worked with the famously disinherited herself, Alfred Gilmore, and heir of the publisher clearing house, wanted to transform her class identity. She did not want to be part of an owning class anymore and asking more to support her in redistributing 5 billion. In 2016, she took a more unusual, experimental and relational approach to giving his money away, inviting a group of uh, 12 people, cross-class and racial diversity artists, activists and movement organizations who each received $2 lakh to invest in a social justice and additional 1 lakh as a personal gift, followed by the second uh, 2,30,000 distribution, no string attached. Alfred's approach is radical for the economics mutualism she created in the US. Right now, economic connect, uh, connectedness relationship between class is lacking, yet economic mobility and therefore the cultural ideology of the US built on the hand of opportunity ideal in independent on the creating a culture of class exchange bootstrapping or grit don't bring economics gain relationship do Raj City in economics at Harvard has shown this is his work on social capital and economics mobility. His research point out that economic concentrationness is one of the strongest predictors of economic mobility and that increasingly these cross-class friendships are diminishing. Well, some of the world's wealthiest people were wrestling with their privilege and social responsibilities. Too many are vascating in their power. Even philanthropy culture is often a vanity play, allowing the wealthy to boost their social reputation with little reckoning or any genuine relationship with those who have less. In the word of Aruna Howard, a sociologist at Stanford and an expert on philanthropy and civic culture who has started a new initiative called Private Wealth and Public Good. Philanthropy has more often helped Belarus affluent citizens bypass democratic processes and advances the ideology that private accumulation naturally serve public ends. One of the pieces of legislation worth is tackling is the billionaire tax. In California, which is passed, could impose an one of extra 5% tax on the ultra wealthy. The fear is that such a tax would push billionaires out of the state and into tax-free havens and offshore accounts. My own grandfather never became a US citizen and eventually renounced his citizenship to protect his wealth by becoming a citizen of Bahamas. This connection from place and nationality is at odds with some of the ultra wealthy of the old Titan ruthless capitalists like Andrew Carnegie, John T. Rockefeller, Andrew Mellon, who nonetheless put their money to work to support local and national prosperities and who invested in the shared infrastructure for education, the art, the culture, some of more patronizing schemes that saw industrialists like Milton S. Hershey and Henry Ford take an active role in place making can feel nostalgically refreshing compared with the place agnostic billionaires of today. Part of the immigrant trope is that there is always a better place where prosperity can be found, encouraging the upwardly mobile to trade local routes for economic gains. So it is no wonder that many people who have pursued wealth have cut ties, no longer having a loyalty to place that would have carried more communitarian obligations seem in this context. With wealth accumulation as a journey of severance from social obligation and culture context, you can understand how moments to tax the wealthy might be met with deeply ingrained defense mechanism. The group patriotic millionaire is trying to change the pervasive mindset on the tax evasion, inspiring the ultra wealthy to embrace shared prosperity and surrender to a fair tax burden. Its language is clear. The scathing wealthy Americans like us have reached the tax code to give ourselves countless headcount leaving working people paying higher rates than billionaires. Awareness around the merits of taxation is a significant lever for reignition the wealthy social contract to society. But what would a more broad-based re-education for billionaire look like? Every year I read about a billionaire summer camp in Sun Valley, Allahu, which support elite networking and corporate deal flow during uh, re- re- recreational activities like hiking, rafting, and golf. And I think what would a radically different version of billionaire rhetoric look like? I fantastic. I fantasize about the more existential curriculum with which I would microdose billionaires. It would be a dynamic learning experience with an intersectional compounded of feminist theory and radical justice as an offset to bro culture, patriarchal culture, and white supremacy. I would problem- problematize philanthropic from Victorian era to modern day models, institute immersive field trips to understand the complexity of poverty and inequality today, offer a social capital amplifier to build relationship outside of one's bubble or class, etc. And self-development class that said that aid in excavating one's authenticity versus internalized class identity. Not least it, I would add a quick module in understanding the merits of taxation and a field trip of Scandinavia with some northern lights and dog shielding thrown into the support hydroelectric drives, then to the Brazilian rainforest to learn how to be good ancestor and environment stewards. This re-education would enable wealth holders to explore the uh, phenom- phenomenology of their wealth, understanding it from a therapeutic and structural dimension. Developing such awareness would help cut through the distortions that great wealth creates the habit of exceptionalism, a false merit narrative, and a defensiveness around being deserving and entitled to that wealth. Ultimately, it would allow millionaires to reflect on the raw injustice of deep seated inequality, where some wealthy people are finding avenues to migrate out the odd world of privilege in which they have found themselves. There are many more looking to lake up permanent residency in the wealth bubble. Today, many millionaires induced their own dystopian prepare fantasies, fortifying their escape plans and apocalypse compounds. But if we could replace these salvation daydreams with a more humanity focused and noble endeavors like preparing for the common good, it could be transformative. It society is at risk of collapse. Billionaires have greatest power, resources, and responsibility toward ensuring our collective survival. Even without the dystopian backdrop, billionaires can and should adapt to giving away their money and learn to become mere multi-millionaire in order to support wide-scale social flourishing. Their own class descensions can serve to re-empower humanity, and as my mother's experience attests, they may come to rehumanize themselves on the way down. So we have completed this uh, essay. Now it's time to attempt quiz. Okay. So first question: according to the source material, which three interlinked personality traits do some psychologists use to define Dyke trait found the billionaires class? Introversion, no. Aggressive, impulsive, okay. Machiavellism, psychopathy, right. Done. Next, what is the primary reason the author's grandfather, a Greek immigrant, initially entered the shipping industry? He was inspired by the Heterono. He won the company in a high stakes background. He was the only son in the family and daughters who chose to carry the industry legacy. He wanted to prove his worth after dropping out. No. So he won the company in the high stake. Answer is C. Right. According to the studies citing in the next, how much higher is the rate of anxiety in the wealthy teens compared to their less affluent? Okay. Yeah. Marian Mori uses the term money manners to describe Which social phenomena among the wealthy, the unspoken belief and equitable that prevent people from talking about their money, the complex etiquette of knowing which fork to use the formal dinner, no. The strategic use of philanthropy, no. The practical tipping of generous and maintaining the public reputation, done. What does the Greek word Meraki signifies in the context of author? To accumulate wealth through sweat investment and the duty to protect one's family legacy at all cost, uh, to something we love and soul. How does the scarcity mindset uh, manifest in wealthy families according to the source? A strict adherence to budgeting and financial planning to avoid debt, a flux feeling of not having enough to justify hoarding. What was a significant outcome of what was the significant outcome of disinheritance of the author's mother by her billionaire father? She became a lead advocate for the billionaire tax in California. It forget her emancipation and allowed her to make a life of her own. It had Mary, no. She was forced to return, no. Then C. The organization resource generation focused on was specific demographic, middle class people aged, right. Which 18th century philosopher argued that luxury poisoned a whole nation. Okay, I don't know. Wrong answer. This answer is Francis. Okay. Next, true and false. A recent Pew survey found that a majority of Americans believe that being extremely rich is immoral. True, not true. First, only 80% of Americans surveyed believe that being rich is immoral. Next, what radical approach did Harris place Williams 7 billion of the wealth? She lived a diverse group of 12 people in a how to write. Then last question. And the proposed billionaire tax in California mentioned in the text would impose what kind of levy? 5% tax. So then, out of 12, we done two wrongs. Okay, out of 12, we write 83%. Then thank you for the time, and this is my first essay. We will continue in the future. I take too much time for the first. I will try to wrap up in a 40 minutes in the future. Thank you.